Innovation. I mean, that's it. The technology has advanced, particularly for nuclear energy and nuclear technology, and particularly for the small modular plants. That's really the key here, because you can build them smaller now, you can build them cheaper, you can build them faster. There's not as much waste. I mean, there's been a lot of advancements to here, and that's key, and that's going to really be important in the future.
New and existing nuclear reactors are two of our most powerful tools that we hope to make a meaningful contribution to climate change by 2050. We don't have a lot of time to reduce emissions in order to avoid really catastrophic levels of warming. It's our responsibility to develop a comprehensive response to this, to address our dependence on fossil fuels. It's also important that this keeps the momentum and the productivity of the existing fleet of nuclear reactors. I think every country from Germany to Japan to, well, even California is looking at extending the life of their existing nuclear reactors simply because they're so effective at generating power without generating carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
I would be remiss if I did not mention that in the state of Georgia, we currently have the only nuclear reactor under construction right now, and Unit 3 at Plant Vogtle in Georgia was just recently approved for nuclear rods to be put into the reactor. So that's good news, and the NRC had approved them for that, and we're really excited about that. Look, nuclear power is the key because it offers safe, reliable baseload energy that's 24/7, 365 days a year, emission free. And that's what we need. Everybody wants wind power and solar power, but nuclear power is reliable and it's baseload, and that's the key.
First off, it's the world's largest producer of nuclear power. It's more than 30% of all power generated by nuclear, electricity generated by nuclear worldwide. I think there are roughly 92 operable reactors in the United States. The first nuclear reactor opened in 1958 when I was 3 years old. And my home state of Illinois actually generates about 60% of its electrical power from carbon-free nuclear energy. And we lead the country in that. But since the time that I was in grad school, there were really at least 3 concepts for much more advanced nuclear reactors that will be cheaper to operate and much safer. These 3 are what are called high-temperature gas-cooled reactors, metal-cooled fast reactors, and molten salt reactors. And each of them has their pros and cons, and each has potentially very large advantages over the way we do nuclear power today. But for the last 30 years, we have been examining those designs and not building them. And so one of the great things that's happened in the last few years is we're finally prototyping at least 2 of those 3.
It is considered clean energy. And on the world stage, nuclear is going to be extremely important. That's why I've got legislation, the Nuclear Energy Assessment and Cooperation Act, that is so very important because we've got to take the lead here in America. We've got our adversaries who are advancing in nuclear power. We are cooperating with other countries, our allies, to make sure that we don't get too far behind here.
Oh, it's certainly clean in the sense that it puts a very small amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, or methane or any of the other greenhouse gases. That's its single strongest calling card. With the minor exceptions of, everything when you're constructing it, whether it's a windmill or a solar cell, there's a certain amount of emissions associated with the construction. But then the amount of energy that is generated by a nuclear reactor per unit electrical power is just phenomenally high.
Pound per pound, it's cheaper, and that's very important because think about it for a minute. In fact, I just visited a solar farm earlier this week out in my district, and it was just a 46-acre, a relatively small farm, but it would take 235 square miles in order to achieve the same power with a solar farm, a solar field, I should say. It would take 235 square miles to build the equivalent and generate the same equivalent that you could in 2 square miles of a nuclear plant. So, when it's compared pound for pound, that's essentially nuclear wins every time.
Well, its strong calling card is that it works day or night. It doesn't depend on the weather, and so on. It makes what's called baseload electricity, and that's very important for people who don't want the lights to go out on inconvenient times, and also for industries where it's very expensive to have a power interruption in the grid. And so the problem that people are encountering as more and more renewable variable sources are being put on the grid is that there are times when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And then your alternative is, first off, you can try hoping that somewhere else in the United States the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, and that you have installed a power line from there to where you live, and that you can get the power that way. The summer-winter problem is simply the fact that the amount of renewable energy available in many areas of the United States varies by a factor of 2 to 3, depending on where you are in the season. And this is a huge problem, because if you try to solve that with a battery, then you need a battery that can hold its charge for 6 months, which at least my cell phone battery is not good at holding its charge for 6 months.
A lot of people talk about the waste. A lot of people talk about the potential for accidents, and we've had accidents in the past. But again, the technology has advanced such that it has minimized that now. And as far as the waste goes, currently most of the waste is being stored on site. We need a repository like Yucca Mountain. That would be ideal. Not only that, but currently what we are seeing is that the recycling of the nuclear waste, that nuclear waste actually has a lot of energy left in it that can still be utilized, and that's why it's so important.
In America, what we do is we start out by putting the spent nuclear fuel temporarily in cooling ponds, usually located on the site of the reactor, and then after a year or so, it's cooled to the point where you can transfer to what's called dry cask storage, where either it just sits in these dry casts also on the site of the reactor, or we can ship it on rail cars or barges or things like that to a central location where we can either reprocess it, as the French do, or bury it in a deep rock depository, as Finland does.
Absolutely, we should expand it. Again, that's why I've got the legislation, the Nuclear Energy Assessment and Cooperation Act. That's going to help us and our allies, and it's going to help us stay ahead of our adversaries in this world. We'll be able to share information with our allies, share best practices, and avoid the tragedies that have happened in the past, because the advance in technology is the key here. This is not the same nuclear power that we were talking about decades ago. Nuclear power will serve us for generations, whereas solar and wind, you're talking about years. But when you talk about nuclear plants, you're talking about generations of power.
Well, I think we should certainly preserve it as an option. There have been very impressive cost reductions in solar and in wind power. However, the problem with the variability of these remains. I think we're going to have to depend on nuclear power, or in the longer term, maybe fusion power, which is a subject of great excitement. And it's another form of nuclear power that has a lot fewer drawbacks and a much smaller waste stream. These are exciting technologies, and it would be a mistake to stop the research and development to see if we can really have them meet their theoretical potential.